G'day everyone, my name is Dave. I'm one of the consultants in the Reach Australia network, and you've tuned in to a Reach Australia podcast where we are going to be talking buildings. And I'm joined by Andrew Robson. Great to have you here, mate.
Good to be here.
Now, Andrew, you've been involved in all sorts of different buildings all around New South Wales. You watch one happen at Springwood in the Lower Mountains. You played a coordinating role at EV Church on the Central Coast for a couple of their buildings, and again a coordinating role at Carlingford in the northwest suburbs of Sydney. So it's great to have you and your expertise with us. I really just want to start by going, why should we even care about buildings? I mean, let's just think theologically together, just to sort of kick us off. I mean, we could meet under the tree, and isn't that sufficient? You know, what are buildings for? Church is about just people gathered together, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely we can meet under a tree. And in fact, churches have been meeting under trees for 2,000 years in different places and in different situations, and you can. Yeah. You don't need a building to be a church. Yeah. And so you can meet under a tree, you can meet in a school hall, you can meet in somebody's garage. The basic pattern in the early church was people would build a big, basically they'd build a rumpus room on their house. The wealthiest person in church would build a rumpus room, and that's where we'd meet for church. Yeah. And so, the idea that you need a sandstone building with a spire or something, or you don't need a building to be a church. I think it's really important that we express that. However, let's think about meeting under a tree. Yeah. First of all, what happens when it rains? So it's hard. It's hard when it rains. Yep. And some places like LA, you could probably run an outdoor church because it only rains like 2 days a year or something. Yep. But if you're in Sydney, yes, it rains more in Sydney than in London, despite the fact that we bash the Poms about rain. Yep. And all around Australia, there's different climates and things. And meeting outside is pretty tough, actually. Yep. It's you think about Perth. Yeah. Or Adelaide. You think about Adelaide on one of those 48-degree days they have. Brutal. Yeah. Half your congregation would die. So meeting under a tree, while an ideal and a lovely ideal at some level, and we probably should all give it a try. Yeah. It's not really an enduring long-term strategy. Yeah. At some point, you need the rain shelter. Yes. You need something to keep the rain off so that you can meet every week. Yeah. Walls help with that as well. Yeah.
And is there a mission part to this?
That's what I'm going to say. If you want to meet every week reliably, you need walls and you need a roof, so you have a presence. Yeah. You then need to. You're occupying land in some way, so then you need to think about, well, how do I occupy land? I've got to rent it, or I've got to buy it, or I've got to borrow it somehow. And all of those strategies are doable, and we're doing those things. We're doing those things everywhere. But that presence thing is really important for our mission. It's important in two ways. One is that they know we exist. Yes. And of course, when we were meeting in the rumpus room in at times that was because the government was out to get us. Yeah. You think about the early church and their persecutions. Very much this is the pattern in China. They often have the secret room somewhere, or the big room at the back, and they meet in secret. But for us in Western countries, in Australia, having a presence that people can see is really helpful, because they can say, oh, that's that church. You invite your friend to church. You go, the church across the road from the butcher, or the church with the colourful thing out the front, or the whatever it is, And people go, oh yeah, I know where that is. Yeah. The other thing is, as we think about buildings, I think theologically, and think about meeting under the tree, the faithful will meet under a tree in the rain. Yeah. The faithful will come. Yeah. The person who isn't yet a Christian, if we're wanting to engage them in hearing the gospel, they're not going to be happy to sit under a tree. If they come to your church and it's a disgusting experience, and to be honest, I've been in churches that are disgusting, as in it smells of mould, or the roof's literally leaking, or it's dark and dingy, or there's something that's utterly uninviting. There's a hurdle they've got to overcome that's not the hurdle of the gospel. Yeah. Now, of course, you can take that We don't want to run
No.
churches in mega yachts with, but there is kind of a reality that there's a level of comfort and niceness that has to be there for it to be inviting, to be used as a ministry centre in a culture like we have in Australia.
Yeah. So theologically, we're thinking, church is about people gathered together, and yes, we can gather in all sorts of different locations, but a little bit of the imperative of mission and wanting to reach as many people as we can, to gather as many as we can for the sake of God and His glory, does drive us towards, some sort of rain shelter in some way, shape or form. That's really helpful to start just to start to think what sort of drives us in this space. But again, isn't buildings isn't it just for big churches? Like, if you're a church of over 500, then you start to be thinking about building projects and how to manage. I mean, the average church in Australia is less than 100 people. To smaller churches, what should they be thinking about in this space?
Yeah, so I think we can talk later in this series, or however we work it, that we can talk about bigger building projects and how they work. But I think all churches need to be thinking about their space.
Yeah.
And you can do a lot with a little.
Yeah.
If you were thinking critically, as in being critical of your space, and bringing a mission eye to it. How does this look for the visitor?
Yeah.
I would start with disgusting. Remove the disgusting. So we just talked about the church being a rain shelter.
Yeah.
Make sure it is.
Yeah, okay.
Make sure it is a rain shelter. Yep. That'd be my first tip, because some of the disgusting comes from not attending to that.
Yep.
Fix the roof, for goodness sake, fix the roof. Because the other thing is, if you don't fix the roof, you're damaging the structure too.
Yeah,
you're letting rot in, you're actually really not being a good steward of whatever limited building you have. Somebody spent, believe me, a lot of money, a lot of time building that thing, and you got to look after it. At the very least, look after the building you've got.
Yeah.
Think about it critically. Look at, if you've got if you've had a leaky roof, fix the roof. Then look down. You probably need to rip up that carpet and replace it.
Yep.
Now, straight away, you might have spent $10,000, $20,000 there, and that might, in your setting, might require serious planning and might require you to get church together and think into how we're going to afford this, but we need to do it, and connect the doing of the thing with the gospel.
The gospel.
Help them to see that we need to replace the stinking carpet, so that when a newcomer comes, they come back.
Yeah.
They don't just go away going, I've got a headache now from the mould.
Yeah.
I'm not going back there.
Have you got any examples outside of the roof and other bits and pieces you can point us to?
Yeah, so I could pick on our own church here at Northlight. So we're a two-site parish. Yep. So we have West Pymble, which is the building we're in, and we have West Linfield. Over at the West Linfield site, we had that building was built in the late 50s, and it had, that it's all over Australia. I think everywhere in Australia has. The 1950s, for some reason, they put in yellow glass everywhere.
Oh yeah.
The yellow, and I think the idea was you put in the yellow glass, and then later on you put in the lead light pretty glass. But it was about the 50s when the cost of doing that skyrocketed, and people just got stuck with yellow glass. Yep. So we've just run a process of removing the glass, putting clear glass in with a UV tint on it.
Yep.
It is amazing, the difference. So we thought through our after church space, and we realised that where we were doing our after church space wasn't working so well. Now, this is a smaller building with a smaller congregation. We were very hidden, so we thought actually better to do it out the front where everybody can see us.
Yeah.
But to do that, we had to re-landscape the front. So we've re-landscaped the front. Actually, today there's fencing going in. So we've put a nice fence in so that we can now use the front yard. Mums and dads with little kids can be a bit relaxed about their kids. Their kids are just going to run straight out on the road because there's no barrier. There's now a bit of and it just warms it up. We occupy that space. We now have morning tea out the front. and people can see us. People wave at us as we go by. We're there. They can see us. They can see that we don't have two heads. They can. It just opens up that.
Yeah. So what you're saying is in terms of your smaller church sort of listening in, there's all sorts of little things you can do. Even potentially even down to decluttering your entrance.
Yeah, so that's what we've done a bit of an exercise on that building, and one of the things we did was simply remove some old furniture and stuff that wasn't ever going to be used. We moved it out, we went through the processes of doing that, and it's just freshened the thing up. And also, the thing to say, in New South Wales, there are grants you can apply for through local councils, and so a lot of that work we got funded by a grant. Not all of it, but some of it. And we rebuilt a toilet block as well. We renovated a toilet block to make it not so horrific. And all of that just warms the thing up. And I don't know about Queensland or West Australia whether there are grants, but I suspect there would be that kind of thing out there. So find out. So a smaller church can often apply for those grants, like a solar panel grant, which then makes putting air conditioning in your church economically feasible, because although air conditioning will cost a lot, the solar panels will largely offset the cost. So there's different things you can do there.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess lastly, as we start just to introduce this space, is who around Australia should be thinking about buildings? Is this just a suburban thing, and major cities? Who needs to start engaging with this conversation?
I think everybody. I think the principle is there that we just expressed. There's more to be said there theologically, but I think that principle of using your building for mission is an important thing. And so whatever you're going to do requires that you think about your space. It's not just thinking about missionally too. It's thinking about it for the congregation. Does it work? Can they hear the sermon? Is it lit well enough so that they can see their Bibles when they are looking at their Bible? Or is the building so dark that you're driving them all to use their phones? Which I personally think just the Bible works better because you can see more of it at once. But they have to use their phone because it's the only way they can see it. Or is the space conducive to continuing the congregational meeting after the service finishes? Or is it the case that you effectively are telling them to rack off as soon as the service ends because there's nowhere to go? You've got to go now because the next service is coming in, and just when we stand around here and outside there's a road, and whatever your setting is, try and work out how you can make church work better in the built space.
No, it's really helpful. So churches are all over the country.
Absolutely.
We're saying, urban, suburban, regional, different states. Everyone needs to start engaging with this conversation.
We had Kurt Langmead, who's at Lightning Ridge, come in and talk to us at church, and he showed how 1 week at church recently, a mine shaft opened up in the church car park. It was Lightning Ridge's opal mining. A mine shaft opened up right over the aged and disability parking. Some poor old lady turn up, park, open the door and step in a mine shaft. So, you've got to... Wow. They're a very extreme kind of outback, it's very small church, but they've got to deal with... You don't want people dying when they come to church. You want people feeling welcome. And so, they're working on thinking about car parking and how they fit it all together, and anywhere you are, but it'll be different. So, Lightning Ridge is hot, Sydney, wet, Darwin, hot and wet. Wherever you are, you're going to have a particular set of things that are probably, it's going to tilt in a direction. I think if you're in a lot of regional Australia, I think you should be seriously thinking about air conditioning if you don't have it. I know that's mildly controversial in some circles, but I think in modern Australia, mostly people live in air conditioning. So if they turn up to church and they've got this heinously hot, sweaty experience, they just won't come back.
And your own people at that point, engaging with you, speaking.
Dying by the end of year 7 because they can't breathe anymore.
Their maturity to engage, and have an undistracted sort of experience where they're focused on who Jesus is and encouraging one another becomes I'm so hot, you know, I can't concentrate anymore. So yeah, they impact on that level as well. Yeah. As we continue to think about, you know, why to think about buildings, I guess for a lot of churches, they basically fall into a few different categories. They've either purchased, they're borrowing, or they're going to process of buying. What impact does that start to have on, as I guess we think generally about buildings?
Yeah. So obviously, if you own the building you're in, it gives you more control over your ministry. It gives you more security of building your ministry, which helps in many ways. Obviously, it helps with you can leave the building set up. You don't have to, or if you do pack it down, it's on your terms, not on someone else's. If you're borrowing a building, you're very much in the hands of the person you're borrowing it from. If you're renting a building, you're still in the hands of the person you're renting it from. Often churches are renting buildings that are institutionally owned. So we're renting school buildings, community centres. These are often controlled by very much government organisations. And I know, in different states in Australia, the government is variously positive or negative on churches, and I know Victoria, for example, that there's a bit of negativity coming from governmental structures there, which means I'd be even more concerned if I was renting a public school in Victoria on a Sunday that there's potential for that to go wrong for us. And so I think there's an impetus to move up the security chain, to move from borrowing to renting, to move from renting to owning. And I know that's difficult, but I think it's important because I think long term, you can't really plan long term if you're in rented accommodation, because that could change. And since World War I in Australia, and I think this is true in all states, we stopped building community buildings.
Yes.
So you'll look at a lot of parts of Australia in town. You'll have the CWA Hall or the Progress Association Hall or where we stopped building those between World War I and World War II, and after World War II we did not build those at all. And so there's a retreating number of community buildings that we can use. And the danger will be if they put content bars on, you need to sign this document supporting this woke theory of the day, and unless you sign that you can't rent. And so we go, we can't do it. And so there's a problem there. So I think there's an impetus to move towards owning if you can, although sometimes it's just difficult. And that's why I think as we think about these things, whatever scale you're at, partnering with other organisations, reaching out, not being your own little lone ranger. We're in difficult environment here. It's not like 100 years ago you could get 6 guys together in a wagon and some lumber and you could build a church in a weekend. You can't do that anymore.
So what impact does this have on church plants?
I think church plants need to be thinking about building from day one. They need to be thinking about their building from day one. Of course they do. Where are they going to meet? We're going to find something, we're going to rent something, can we control the space at all, or have we got no ability to modify it? But thinking from day one about moving towards owning something. So one of the things that EV Church did before I was there, they bought a house. They bought it quite cheaply. They did well, and it went up quite a bit in value. They sold that and then used that as the seed funds to buy the land. I remember the land deal, the first bit of land they bought from selling that house, that deal went through. Andrew got the phone call when he was interviewing me for the job there. In my lounge room in Springwood. And I remember that. I mean, that was a very important moment for that church because they got the land they needed. But, it was a long time ago now. It was in a regional area. It was a large church. I think there are headwinds now that mean we need to work together on these things more than we have been.
That's really helpful. This has been great. Just as a introduction to get to know a little bit more, I guess, why we should start thinking about buildings. We'd love for you to keep listening along as we've got a couple more episodes to go, and we're going to do a bit more of a deep dive into, I guess, the process of what building a building sort of looks like. But thanks for joining us for this episode. We'd love to see you at the Reach Australia National Conference. You can come along to that. You'll be able to check out one of the buildings that you've been involved with, but you'll get to also get some great content, and we'd love to think about how we at Reach Australia can help your church start to thrive and grow in this space of buildings.